Before we dive into today's episode, we've got something special to share with all of you. We're proud to announce the launch of Wild Roots, a brand new film series from Wolf Connection and the Wolf Connection podcast. This series takes the stories, lessons, and connection we've experienced with the wolves at our sanctuary out into the wider world, exploring what it truly means to reconnect with nature and the wilds. The first installment is called A Handful of Dirt, featuring John Potter. If you want to be a part of this journey, you'll need to sign up to get early access to each film as it's released. Stay tuned to the Wolf Connection and Wolf Connection podcast socials for when the trailer drops and the link information on where you need to go to sign up. And make sure you're following along. This is just the beginning.
The land, the animals, and the people. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast.
Okay, joining us today from Grand Teton National Park, she's been the Tribal Community Engagement Fellow for a year and a half. First saw the work that she was doing through our partner, actually, and sponsor for the podcast, Jacques-Marie Mage, and really wanted to get into the programs, her background, and what she's doing to help a lot of these underserved Indigenous communities there in Grand Teton National Park. She is Cadence Truchot. Cadence, it's so nice to finally meet you, to finally get this together. How's everything going with you today?
It's great. Thank you for asking. How are you?
I'm good. I'm doing wonderful. I think this is, like I said, I read that article and I saw a little bit of background about yourself, and this really is hitting on a lot more of how this podcast is expanding and talking about how nature and getting back to our roots in the environment are helping communities of all different levels, not just those that we serve at the sanctuary, but those that you are serving in Grand Teton. And yeah, it just really spoke to me and really wanted to get you on to talk about this. But just give everyone, a little bit of a background on yourself. Where did you grow up? And talk about your connection with the environment and how that has influenced your life at this young age and getting you to the point where you're at right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up on the Fort Hall Indian Reservation in Idaho for the majority of my youth. I was born in Star Valley, Wyoming, which is like the most western side of Wyoming. And shortly after I was born, we moved to Fort Hall. And then moved back to Wyoming when I was about 16 and graduated high school here. And yeah, it was very abrupt change for me, but had a lot of insight at a young age, going from the reservation back to Wyoming. And yeah, in terms of my connection to the natural world and this environment, even throughout the years that I was growing up in Fort Hall, my dad was a hunting guide in Hoback Canyon, which is just south of Jackson, Wyoming, which is one of our gateway communities to the park. And spent a lot of time outside, picking up rocks or finding, all sorts of stuff, climbing trees and hills and whatever. And I can't think of a specific experience that kind of was like a highlight moment that I guess was my aha connection to the landscape or this natural environment. But I think there's just too many to name. We were always camping, hunting, fishing, you name it. And I'm a part of the Agaitika clan, which Agaitika means salmon eater. And so we went salmon fishing in Idaho every chance that we got in the summer. And yeah, this connection of just being exposed to the wilderness, this natural place. It's very authentic and real. And yeah, I think there are like two main ways that I perceive the natural environment, this natural world that we live in, and the ways that I connect with it. And those two like main themes are reciprocity, which is, whatever you take or what is given to you, you respect it by giving back. Whether you're a researcher taking, data samples or you're conversating with someone and they're sharing knowledge or experiences with you, or collecting plants or vegetation, like reciprocating that gift by giving back, planting seeds, leaving offerings, or leaving no trace is a big thing. And I think that's the biggest way to kind of show that reciprocity and respect. And then another perspective is relationality. And one key thing that I do to kind of reflect relationality, which is, the sense of creating a relationship with, the natural world. The abiotic and biotic terminology kind of insinuates this space in a very interconnected environment. And so I always kind of refrain from using abiotic or biotic terminology. And instead, especially when on my programs, whether it's with the general public or the Indigenous youth, we use like pronouns to address the trees or the wind or the mountains or the river, and giving that kind of perspective, just that small shift, kind of puts on a different lens, I guess, of how you engage or choose to engage with this natural world. And Robin Wall Kimmerer actually talks about this a lot in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. But there's a quote in there that she mentions, if you address a tree as a she, it kind of gives you a moment of pause on how you interact with the tree. And yeah, I think those two perspectives are really my key points of connecting. And the Tetons here in Grand Teton, we have a Shoshone word for them, but essentially it means big brother. And so every morning when commuting to work and I see Big Brother, I tell him, you look great today, Big Brother. And so with the sun, when it rises or sets, thank you for another great day. You did a great job. See you tomorrow. Those types of things, that change of, perception has really highlighted how I choose to engage.
That's such a powerful way to explain it and really resonate with the natural world in that way. And I was going to ask a question. I think you answered it already, but just it seems as though from a young age with your father and going, talk about that relationship, I guess, specifically with that land ethic and hunting salmon and that reciprocity. I love that you're engaged in that, and then translating that to working with the groups, which we'll dive into in just a second. But how that ethic must have been formed from a very young age for you, right? And like, just talk a little bit more about that salmon hunting and what that reciprocity means, and that ethic that you must have learned from your father when you're doing that.
One thing that pops into my head when you asked that was I could hear my dad, in terms of us being outside. One of the things we always tell us kids was leave things better than you found it. And that really stuck with me, and it still does to this day. In terms of just being outside, if there's trash or something, pick it up, or, leave things better than you found it. But also in terms of salmon fishing, like the way that we go about fishing is very, we're using our resources in the surrounding area. And to explain that a little bit deeper, my dad will actually, when he's fishing for salmon, if he catches a female fish who has eggs, he will reuse those eggs to catch the fish instead of, fake bait or, the stuff that can break off and leave a trace. He reuses, he uses all the sources that we can to continue doing our salmon fishing, and using a lot of people traditionally use like spearing. We'll spear the fish, and they'll use like super, super ridiculously long but necessary lodge poles to like wade through the river and spear these fish. And the kind of respect that you have to have in order to sneak up on a salmon is yeah, it's incredible to witness. And I've been very fortunate to see that with my own eyes and like witness it firsthand for many years.
Yeah, I can't imagine the stealth that is involved in that type of hunting, and also just, as you were saying, relating to the trees and the wind with those, but almost in some way anthropomorphizing the areas around you, and putting those things to a name. I mean, and to your point, when you were talking about braiding sweetgrass, that's on my nightstand. It's the next book in my thing to read. So it's everything you say just resonates right off the top. And I love this already. Talk about this tribal engagement fellow, because you've been doing this for a year and a half. I'd love to know, and I'm sure people are listening, how does that process come about? How do you get, I guess, to even apply for something like that? What's the steps to take? And then once you're in it, what is that when you finally say you are going to be the Tribal Community Engagement Fellow? What sort of things come up for you as through that process and when it finally comes to fruition?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story a little bit on how I kind of found this position. I was studying geoarchaeology at Utah State University. And although I love, anthropology, the study of people, and geology, the study of earth, and I've always loved rocks and understanding, the interconnectedness, I kind of had a moment of realization that I wasn't sure if I was, doing what was right for me, I guess. And I kind of felt a bit that, school was getting in the way of my education. As weird as that sounds, but sometimes we get so fixated on the schoolwork or the work that needs to be done, to get your degree or whatever, that we aren't actually taking very much away from it in terms of what sits with us correctly in terms of our education. And so I kind of put all my eggs in one basket, and I literally just searched tribal relation jobs near me, because I knew that I wanted to do something meaningful. I knew that I wanted to gain more experience and give back to the tribal communities. And I was very curious to see what avenues I might take to get there, especially, I was 21 at the time that I applied for this job. And so it was just this turning point, and this job popped up. I didn't think I was going to be qualified. Again, I didn't have my undergrad degree or anything at that point. And let alone I didn't have, a lot of background in education. I had some experience in high school where I shadowed under a second grade teacher for a little while, and I loved it. But anyways, in terms of like actual, a track record of working with youth, I didn't have very much to work off of. But next thing I knew, after I applied, I had an interview. And I remember one of the questions that was asked in that interview was something along the lines of, what does youth engagement mean to you? And I kind of, sat with it for a little while, and I eventually came to this realization, and something that I've noticed and talked about amongst, other professions. But, when a herd of buffalo are being attacked by predators, wolves, bears, you name it, what they do is the adults will circle around their young and protect their young, because they are very vital to carrying on, their legacy. And that's exactly, how I grew up perceiving youth and being a part of the youth, and also, in terms of where we stand with our younger people. And, they're very important. They're a vital source of our community and our heritage, and they are who are set to carry on our legacy. And so I was really looking forward to seeing, if I got this position, and I did. And then once I started, it was my very first day here, I was actually on a program. We had a tribal youth corps working in the park, and I went out, and they were young adults. They were college-age kids. And I just remember thinking, like, these kids, some of them are, like, I'm calling them kids, but some of them are older than me. Like, this is such a bizarre situation to be in. I don't know, like, how to navigate this. But I learned a lot that week, that first week of just, being immersed in the experience firsthand and hearing, the needs or the wants or what it takes to set up a program like that and then execute it. And so from there, it took me a while to learn the systems, working in the National Park Service and all of that. Like, this is the first federal agency that I've been a partner of. Like, there's a lot to learn, but I did a lot of deep diving into like archives and past programs, learning the ins and outs, of tribal youth engagement in Grand Teton and what has been done, and what I could do with that. And when I started, we had two major youth programs. We call them Indigenous Ground Leaders programs. And one of them was with Fort Hall, where I grew up, with the Shoshone-Bannock. And the other was, actually, we referred to them as Indigenous Youth Voices, which is another program. But they're from like the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. And it's very intertribal. And yeah, they're very diverse. One's very much like you're a part of the program consistently, you're leading programs, you're scheduling a week long of, activities and whatnot. And the other is like, we'll help fund you, get you here. Like, if I'm available and have the capacity, I'll show up. And I usually make it a point to like show up and at least introduce myself. And yeah, seeing the very like diverse areas that seemed to both be very beneficial for what that tribe needed was kind of the start to understanding, the wide spectrum of tribal youth engagement. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it just seems like you have this already elderly wisdom about you because and I've heard this too. And, going through college myself and dealing with programs, I had a similar interaction when I started at the sanctuary and I was pulled into programs, and I, like you, I didn't know really what I was doing, but there was just a way to navigate it. And I totally understand that fear, but also that curiosity of how can I use my gifts or my strengths to work this thing. But yeah, it really seems like you do the work. It's almost like you do the extra credit to figure out the ways, like going into and figuring out what's been done before. How can we change these up a little bit? I mean, was any of that perspective that you took into this when you began a little bit from your college experience, from that scholastic, but also you have this unique perspective as a Lemhi Shoshone. So like, were you bringing in some of the stuff that you've learned, that you experienced, and bringing this into these programs, which we will get into next? Because I want to know how these work and how similar they are to the ones we do on the sanctuary. But yeah, it seems like at a young age, you already have life experience. You already have scholastic experience. So what are the things that you're able to bring your unique perspective to these students, these young adults that they may think you might not have at such a young age?
Yeah, I think, in terms of like my education and background, I think I resonated a lot with the need. The programs that are happening in the initiative was something that I wish I had the opportunity to be a part of when I was younger. And through school, I did archaeology field school for many years and gained a lot of experience from there of, understanding myself a little bit better, understanding, my capacity and what I can take on and how I might navigate, especially when being exposed to the elements and out in the wilderness. Because we spent a long time outside just doing archaeology, and the perspective that I brought into the field was also something that was very valuable. there were there's very many students that are interested in archaeology and anthropology and geology. There's all these degrees that are working outside, but the perspective that I could bring into it helped, give me a leg up in terms of the way that I can interpret a landscape. I don't know exactly what cultural resources are out there for sure just yet, but I can see on the landscape, especially from growing up, hunting, fishing, camping, whatever, watching where the game trails are, and just kind of reading my environment before diving in any deeper. Those types of things, not everybody has that background or perceives the natural world that way. And so I think, going forward, and I still see this with the youth that I work with, I can see their gears turning in a different way than, other gears might turn, just because of the way that we grow up and the lessons that we're taught and the environments that we grew up in. And, their how they perceive or the questions that they ask. I know that there's more like me, and how can I use, the space that I have to create a space for them to share. And as a Lemhi Shoshone woman, I think, I have a legacy that was gifted to me by those who walked before me. But I also believe that there are many, purposes in life. And in this chapter of mine, I have the ability to create those spaces for legacy to take its course. But I think, it goes a little bit broader than that. I perceive myself as an Indigenous person when going into these conversations with any tribal person, even if they are from Fort Hall, where I grew up. I perceive this persona of an Indigenous person, not necessarily specifically Lemhi Shoshone woman, because I've worked with people from the Aboriginal people in Australia, community members from New Zealand and Puerto Rico and First Peoples in Canada, and there's a lot of similar backgrounds that First Peoples have faced through colonization and just this constant change that it was seemingly out of our control. And honing in specifically to Grand Teton through the 24 associated tribes, there's very many perspectives to take in account. And even if they aren't all shared with me, I recognize that, as an Indigenous person, I also have some perspectives that I, don't feel comfortable in sharing amongst a broader group. And in some elements, I'm happy to share perspectives as an Indigenous person. I think it just depends on the circumstance, but that greater, broader understanding of being an Indigenous person is kind of a key perspective that I think I bring to the table.
And it's what you're stating there, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it really is about something that we talk about, at least at our sanctuary, especially with youth, and allowing them to open up to other different perspectives, their experiences. It's really about sacred timing and giving people the space and the time. And that's sometimes not allotted in our everyday, whether it's life, whether it's familial, scholastic, work, or otherwise. We're somewhat forced into these situations where we have to come up with an answer right away, and we're not given the time and the space to really reconnect, as you've been doing through our conversation here already. And I've heard you go back to the salmon fishing. I've heard you go back to scholastic, and really just embodying the whole of who you are. Mm-hmm. And that's so difficult to do when you're in a new space, a new person's in front of you, or new people are in front of you, to be able to give that space, to give that breath of letting people settle. And it's so unique. There are a couple parallels already with what you guys are doing that we factor in with ours. So this is, it's truly phenomenal that these types of programs continue to exist. I mean, talk about this. I know these are 1 week programs. And you mentioned 24 tribes with ancestral connections in the lands of Grand Teton, which is a lot, as you said. I'm sure there's a lot, like you say, cultural differences. There's a lot of different personalities. As we all know, we all have different personalities. But I guess we'll start first with how do Indigenous communities gain access to what you guys are doing? What's kind of the process to get them there? And then we can go into what goes on in the program. So what's the first step they have to do in order to get to you to be able to be led by, Cadence Truchot around Grand Teton and all these other things?
Yeah, I think that is something that I am actively improving and using my resources to improve and learning how to do that. But previously we've, been contacted by people who are interested in doing something with their youth. They don't necessarily always have an idea of what we already do, but they have that drive to reach out, and sometimes those are through like other connections that they have at the park, and are kind of guided towards us. And then there's other times where our most recent edition was with the Kiowa Nation in Oklahoma. And we had actually met through the tribal consultation, the government consultation that the park hosts every year in the fall of 2024. And we talked about our tribal youth engagement programs that we have and, spreading that amongst their communities. And there was already an immediate interest, and we hit the ground running with that one. And I think that's definitely something that we can continue emphasizing, bringing up in those, formal conversations. And then another one is just, we've been, whenever we get the chance, we're present in the community, whether that's other youth programs that other tribal, partners are doing, or going to job fairs or like local events, or there's also this Native American education conference that Central Wyoming College hosts every year in Riverton, Wyoming. And we've also had a few contacts come through those connections. But most recently, we actually released our first edition of a tribal engagement newsletter called the River to Ridge Connection. And I had actually come up with the name River to Ridge because it kind of insinuates this broad spectrum of, from the valley floor to the top of the Tetons. Like there's this broad spectrum of engagement that can happen, and let's see what we can do. And within that newsletter, we talk about a variety of ways to engage with our tribal communities. And one of those is our tribal youth engagement program. But yes, we are further developing our contact list for that newsletter to be emailed to. We also print hard copies and send it to our tribal reps. But always looking for ways to spread the word and look at different ways to get connected.
Yeah. And talk about real fast before we get into the ways that these programs are helping people be reconnected to the land, just the expanse of the lands that encompass Grand Teton. Because if there's 24 ancestral, tribal ancestral connections, just give everybody just a quick, a brief, idea of how large this area is that encompasses Grand Teton.
Yeah. So Grand Teton is 340,000 acres. And we are, neighbors with Yellowstone National Park. And Yellowstone and Grand Teton are encompassed in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which is a pretty large ecosystem. Originally Grand Teton was established in 1929, and originally it was just mainly our mountains. It was just the Teton Range. And over time, the valley floor was, designated as the Jackson Hole National Monument. And then in 1950, I believe was when Grand Teton National Park and the Jackson Hole National Monument became collectively Grand Teton National Park. But yeah, I mean, this vast landscape, it's so diverse. We've got the valley floor. It's very, smooth valley terraces from, ancient glaciers carving it out, and the Teton Range just being so magnificent. Our mountains are young, but our rocks are old. And yeah, it's very incredible, very diverse.
The Wolf Connection podcast is now sponsored by our new partner, Jacques-Marie Mage. This LA-based brand is known for their limited edition, handcrafted eyewear and luxury goods, but also for their stewardship program, which supports various nonprofits and individuals who are working to protect a future for wild wolves.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the places on my bucket list to get to, is to get to Grand Teton and to see that place. Just when you're encompassing these programs and when you're beginning this and when a group comes on site, there's so many different ways. I was reading through, as I said, a little bit about your background and what this program offers. Talk about a little about Reconnect. How are these kids or this youth or these young adults, they're able to reconnect? I know you were talking about plant-based, place-based education, and then forming leadership within these groups, having the youth that are there actually lead some of these activities. So just go into how those things sort of parallel with each other and what kind of offerings are there, because not everyone learns the same way, or not everyone interacts the same way with anything, whether it's in school or otherwise out in nature. So what are the different ways that you get these groups engaged in that short span of time of a week? But in reality, I'm sure you've seen 1 week can feel like they've been there for a year, and the amount of change that happens. So just go into that a little bit.
Yeah. So when going into planning a tribal youth engagement program, there's kind of 3 core themes that I kind of try to highlight. But also, going into these planning sessions with the tribal leads, I, facilitate the program, but I don't necessarily always lead the programs, and kind of leave that to them to take on, whether that's bringing in traditional knowledge keepers and our elders or diverse community members or whatnot. And they can lead their cultural, traditional pieces. But when I'm, scheduling or thinking about different activities to have a part of the agenda for the week, I try to highlight on first, connection to self. Kids coming from all these different locations and different backgrounds, like how can they really heighten their sense of self through their experience. And I encourage them to, use their 5 senses, with the exception of taste, especially being out in the wilderness. Use your 5 senses of, your surroundings, the experience, the now, the present, and how do you play a role in that? Just going into that. And, sometimes we'll have some self-reflection questions at the end of the day or even at the end of the program. And there's a lot of just, these experiences really come from, how did I play a part? And why was it relevant that I was there? Yes, it's a cool trip, but what can I do about it? What can I take with me? What is tangible? And I think a lot of that, self-reflection, that connection to self is a great place to start and kind of, re-highlight throughout the program. Next is connections to community, culture, tradition, heritage. And a lot of that, again, is led by the tribal leads, but, they also kind of just come naturally. And, there's this motive of, we already have connections to this place, but how can we highlight certain areas, whether that's learning about the plants and the different medicines that this place holds, or, like doing arts and crafts or storytelling or whatever, from beadwork to all sorts of things, just creating that sense of community through, your sense of identity and self. And then third is connection to place, which also ties back to place-based education, which I'll explain in just a second. But I think, connection to place comes through those experiences and opportunities that we might offer. Horseback riding or whitewater rafting, or I've led, snowshoe hikes, or, we've gone and visited some cultural resource sites, and, the evidence, we're told for our entire lives that we've been in these places for time immemorial. But then there's that aha moment that once you see the evidence that we've been here since time immemorial, it's this sense of, resiliency amongst the community. We've lasted change thus far as a united front, and we will continue to do so and protect these places so that our kids' can come back and have the same experience. Going with that, place-based education is really, honed into a local context. You're surrounding a natural environment, and through that local context of the educational programs, there's this community engagement that ties into it. How can we as a community take care of our home and understand it? And that also ties in, the local context. There comes culture and, diverse backgrounds again, and the complexity of a place. So how can we, kind of source and utilize our power of having that local and, interconnected being sense of this place, and heighten it to use in terms of serving and protecting our natural world.
Yeah. You touched on a couple different things that really resonated with me when you talked about the legacy and the resilience, and when there's a realization of connection to a place that's ancestral, or a place that's been handed down, as you said, through time and through story. And when those aha moments happen, I wonder if you can pinpoint it, and if you can, it's okay. I wonder where that disconnect occurs originally within their lives before they come and see all of you and go to these places. Has it been, just because it's far removed, because it's historical, because it's a place they've never been before, that there's that disconnect? And then once you step foot on a place, you go, oh, wow, I feel that, maybe not myself, but my ancestors, someone that I've known that's blood related or otherwise, has been to these places before. What is that like to have the tribal partners, guys, lead that, and to ultimately see those aha moments and to see that recognition that there is a connection that's been living inside all along?
Yeah. I can't think of like a specific experience, but in terms of where that disconnect originated, I think, there's a lot of different conversations that can go with that. Colonization, Western expansion, the treaties, the agreements, the legal, whatever, the limitations that were placed on these communities by our predecessors, are, how we navigate in the modern time. And I think, we as humans are very comfortable in the development. We've built cities, we've created the phone, the internet, there's mathematicians and lawyers and doctors. But I think going not just for our Indigenous peoples, but beyond that, our general public and just overall, like they come back from, their lives, and they come and experience Grand Teton or the wilderness, wherever it may be. And none of that matters. I think, being human, we sometimes have this misconception that we are far superior than any other being, just because we've created the phone or the internet or so forth. But the moment that you step, foot into a wilderness area, like none of that matters. And if you don't have that respect, that relationality, that reciprocity, and you still have this idea that we are superior, I think that's where a lot of disconnect and harm happens, whether it's to the natural world or to ourselves, just because we weren't prepared. And I think in terms of our tribal communities being removed from these spaces and placed far away in some instances, no matter what, it's harder to get engaged with these places and reconnect. The tourist attraction in Jackson, Wyoming is booming, and visitors, the target range for tourists in Jackson is like, they're making $500,000 a year. That is not the case for a lot of our tribal communities, especially, coming from a reservation. Like, I'm in awe with how much, money funnels in and out of this place. And that is another thing that just makes it so much harder to reconnect and get back to these places. But, through our programs and through the support of our, partners and whatnot, like we have the ability to alleviate some of those stressors, to reconnect, and profoundly grateful.
I mean, just talk about some of the things that you're able to implement in these programs during this week time. I know you talked about some crafting arts. I mean, what are some of the ways? I think there was like not trail clearing, but like trail upkeep and things like that. What are the ways that they're sort of gaining these either skills or finding maybe ways that they can have a career path or find joy in something that they might not have known existed? So what are some of the ways that they get involved during this program with you all, whether it's through storytelling or otherwise, to reconnect? What are some of the activities and things that you guys do? Did you hear that?
I think.
Oh, sorry.
I think that some of the things that we do, kind of highlighting those career and professional skill sets, is they get the chance to meet people who work in the park, whether that is our park staff and PS workers, or through our concessionaires or other partner organizations. They're, in some instances, we get the chance to have the time and space to learn about their profession that, park staff is working under, what it takes to be in that profession, and just, simply the systems of operations. One program that we do, they spend a day doing mini internships, is what we call them, just because it's a day. But I kind of pitch the different divisions or different programs to them the night before, and they sign up for whatever division they want to go under the following day. And they get the hands-on experience. They've done trail maintenance. They've done historic preservation, where they, put linseed oil on old cabins. They've been with vegetation, seed collecting or cleaning seeds, gotten a tour of the nursery. They've spent time doing what we call with our hospitality at Grand Teton Lodge Company. And that was actually a request that came through from our youth. And they were very interested in learning more about that and what that means, especially, in a park. And they loved it. They got, head to toe rundown of the operations at Grand Teton Lodge Company. They got the tour of the retail spaces and, how they decide what goes out on the floor. They've toured, gone through the systems of housekeeping, the restaurants, all the diverse operations it takes to run a lodge as, diverse and magnificent as Grand Teton Lodge Company. I think those career experiences, they get that time to listen and ask questions from people who have gotten to these positions throughout, whatever background they come from. But we've also seen it where park staff or other partners will ask them, like, what do you think? Like, what would you change about operations? And in that space, the kids just light up with, appreciation and inspiration of they want to hear what I have to say, and what I have to say is important. And even further than that, we have no lack of interests of people wanting to work in the park. But I've seen it to where some, leads or supervisors or whatnot that are talking with the youth are very intrigued and interested in seeing how can we get your perspectives on our team. Again, circling back to my experiences, having a perspective that, can help each other out back and forth on terms of, common ground and understanding and making things better. That is something that, any employer looks for when hiring, but especially with our tribal youth thinking about their next steps. Now they have not only just an understanding of what it takes to get into these professions, but they've made their connections, they've networked, they've got, information and, in some instances, points of contact, who to get in contact with if they're serious about applying. In some cases, if they do need to do more work, whether it's through school or whatever, they've got it lined out of okay, if this person did this, and if this is what I'm passionate about doing, then this is my next step. And so I think, there's a lot of great experiences that come from that, and getting to meet with people who are doing the job, and then making it a little bit more of a tangible, realistic, not so far-fetched experience. Because I think that's another common misconception when it comes to working in any park.
Yeah, and what you're saying goes back to one of the first things that you mentioned early on, is that reciprocity, is that repairing sort of these broken relations. Again, I not done by the folks that are currently in these situations, whether it be the Indigenous communities or the Park Service, but just the foundational things that happened decades ago, century ago, whatever it may be, and really trying to repair those things and offering mentorship, which truly leads to stability and growth within a lot of these younger folks. And it's when you see that firsthand, it truly is the encapsulation of really what the natural world and the wild and the environment can do for us. Because in many other places, if maybe we're in an urban setting or a concrete jungle type of situation, there's nothing really to connect those two worlds. It's just, here's the job, this is what we need, and these are the qualifications. Whereas here, there is a tangible resource that is, as you say, it wants to be maintained, wants to have a positive relationship with, and that can reciprocate that love and that respect back to you. And so it's everything that it seems that you guys are incorporating really has that effect on the youth and these young adults to be able to tangibly see those things happen in real time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's truly remarkable. I always like to ask this too, because I never know sometimes in these areas, And because we are, the Wolf Connection podcast, and we just want to do that, is there in the Grand Teton area, what are you talked about salmon with your upbringing? Are salmon the main sort of piece or totem like of wildlife that a lot of these tribes connect with? Are wolves sort of in there? Is it bison? What are sort of the main characters, I guess, on the landscape that most of these tribes sort of connect with, and that you guys try to integrate as much as you can, obviously within reason, to bring sort of that cultural aspect back into their lives?
Yeah, I think, as we mentioned, there's 24 associated tribes, and there's a lot of perspectives that come with that. Different things have greater significance than others, from
Right.
places to vegetation to, our animals, our other wildlife. And I think the most common theme that I've worked with thus far is bison or buffalo, and how, they might resonate with connecting with that. And even though we don't have a, designated buffalo team in Grand Teton, Yellowstone does. And so, in some instances, I'll get in contact with Yellowstone and say, this group's doing a day trip to Yellowstone. Can you meet us at this picnic spot and just chat with them about what we do? Or, those types of things. But another thing, especially in terms of buffalo and wolves, is, the history that they have within, the government and systems of operations and park operations that, happened way before my time and, anybody else who's worked here, their time. But, predators, bears, wolves, and then buffalo as well, they were nearly wiped, extinct. And, in some cases they were. And so, the efforts that have gone into replenishing them in a population and their place in this ecosystem, it's been, a long time coming in, hard work, but we've noticed and recognized their importance and key, elements of having them in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And the way I perceive, working with our tribal people is very similar. They were a key piece of this ecosystem for time immemorial. There's evidence on the landscape for thousands of years, dating back thousands of years. And we've learned a lot from them, like prescribed fire and, how to really dive into ethnobotany and understanding our plants, all these different backgrounds that we've learned in partnership with our tribal peoples. But, going forward, we need to continue strengthening their presence in the ecosystem, because them too played a very valuable, key place in this ecosystem. And, they know, a lot about how to take care of a special place like this, and bringing them into the conversation and creating space for more voices to be heard from these communities, I think, ties back to replenishing our populations of buffalo and bears and wolves. And I think, that connection can definitely be made.
How are you all in your, I hate to call it small, but it seems like you have such a vast, coverage. How are you all creating that safe environment to be able to have these cultural conversations, to recreate, to plant, to gather, to exercise these land rights that are, it seems, slowly starting to become more of the conversation, and for there to be actionable items for this, not only this generation that you're working with, or the generation you've been working with the last year and a half, but the generation coming up after that, to be able to incorporate these cultural teachings within the landscape of Grand Teton going forward? How's that environment being set up, just for you guys in particular?
I think, the way that I perceive this, to start, is within tribal engagement in the National Park Service. There's two key ways to go about it. There's the formal piece, which is, the government to government tribal consultation, where the park is talking about projects and changes to the landscape, to the way that we engage with our visitors, all those types of things, park management, what changes need to be made. And then there's the informal piece, and this is the piece that I mainly live in. The informal piece is that meaningful tribal engagement. How can we focus more on people and culture and heritage and community and legacy? And going, through my position, my job is creating opportunities and experiences and that sense of community and, making that space for more tribal perspectives and voices to be heard outside of the consultation that also occurs, which both are very, very important. But in the formal consultation, that's, our elected tribal representatives that speak for the tribe. Whereas for our youth, how do you perceive, the changes that may be made or that you would like to be made, and how can you be a positive, reinforcement for that change? Because, the only constant is change, it's inevitable. So how can we highlight those other perspectives and encourage and delegate, these conversations and give the youth a little bit more autonomy and, trust in themselves that their voices do matter, they are heard, and, kind of promote that sense of initiative and leadership amongst their communities. Going forward, there's, not only just my programs, the tribal youth engagement programs that the park does, but there's also different avenues that I go about, creating a space that feels comfortable. I don't necessarily feel that we're in an unsafe environment. I definitely think there's still work to be done, but what is in my control, which, trickles down from those limitations and agreements that come from that formal piece of consultation. What is in my control is education and, the resources that we have readily available. And, what authority do I have as Ranger Katie, is sometimes used for the kids, what can Ranger Katie do to create a space for them? And, that might look like, we have a certain limit of berries that we can pick within the park. And if they want to have choke cherries to go with their dinner or the breakfast the day before for a snack, let's make that happen. Or if there's a special space that, to their, community is a space that they would like to, sit with and have that connection to self, place, and community. How can I engage with that space and our tribal communities? And within that request, do they want space to be alone? Do they just need to, how to get there, whatever? And in some instances, if there's a space that is, sacred or whatnot, but it's in the public's view, it's crowded with people, as Ranger Katie, I have a little bit more authority to block off a space or guide the public eye somewhere else for the time being. Or even as an Indigenous person, I recognize that some stories and things aren't meant for me to hear or, interpret. And so I can keep myself busy creating the space for them to do what they feel that they need to do and what is right for them, and use what is in my control to best navigate those situations. And then going even beyond that, I will, it's very common throughout the summer, but I'll often get emails from interpretive rangers or seasonal staff working in the visitor centers that want to incorporate some Indigenous perspectives or knowledge, but want to make sure they're doing it in a very respectful way. A lot of times, especially when I started, I was very curious to see, where is the Native American representation? And, working here for so long, I think it's very commonly, another misconception of it's not that we don't care as a park service. It's that we're so I especially see it with our seasonal staff, our interpretive staff. It's that they care so much that they don't want to cause further harm or injustice to these communities. So they'll reach out to me to see, what's best appropriate in interpreting these, about migration or these animals, or why, the buffalo restoration efforts are so important and so forth. Would it be appropriate if I did this or whatnot? Do you have any suggestions? So there's one way that I communicate within our park staff. And I also do a tribal training tool presentation when they start their seasons of, talking about reciprocity and relationality and how to best, go about leading programs and bringing in traditional ecological knowledge into our programs. And, how can we represent in these other perspectives that are respectful and still acknowledge our First Peoples. And I've also done trainings for our partners, our, educational partners and stuff, their staff, if they're curious about, how to represent our Indigenous peoples through our educational programs. Where do they start and how do they go about it? And I think, taking that next step is helping our professional education and different divisions and park staff and partners and whatnot, how to better themselves on how they communicate and strengthen their understanding of Indigenous knowledge and just communication and how they might engage with our tribal communities. And I think there's a lot of work to be done still, but as I had also mentioned, I think at this point in my time, I'm in a great space to kind of create the space for legacy to take its course.
I wholly respect the amount of work that you're doing, that the service is doing, that your programs are doing, because it does seem to, just in the little time that you and I have had this talk, had this podcast, that you are really truly making measurable change and measurable impacts on these communities and on these individuals. And that's what's needed more in these spaces right now, more than ever, I think, to make sure that we secure, this knowledge and this wisdom from ancient leaders, learning from the environment and then putting those into practice. So I'm just blown away by the amount of work that you guys are doing, that you're doing, and it's incredibly impressive. And I'm really glad that we were able to have this conversation. I mean, anybody who's listening to this, Cadence, just tell them what's the best way to maybe learn more about what's happening and how they could feasibly get involved if that's a way, if there's a way to do that with what you are all doing over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the kind words. And I think, how to get connected with us and keep up with what's going on in the park. Our official park partner, the Grand Teton National Park Foundation, they will post articles about all sorts of things that are happening in the park, and tribal engagement is sometimes one of those. And, we have our Grand Teton NPS website as well. And they speak to a couple of, our tribal engagement programs that happen throughout the park, ways to get involved, all sorts of things. And and I think, another thing worth mentioning in terms of learning more about what I do is that Jacques Marie Mage article that was written about me a little over a year now. And I talk a little bit more about what I do. I think those are great places to start. And through those other connections, like the websites and stuff, sometimes you can go through rabbit holes to find more. So, yeah.
Yeah. Let's put people down the rabbit holes, and we'll have all those links to the websites and to that article, which was wonderfully done. My last question for you, Cadence, is when you hear the word wolf, what's the thing that comes to your mind?
Ooh, I think that circles back to with community comes resilience. I think, wolves can't survive very well on their own. They can, but they're also a very social being, just as humans are. And I think just like the wolves, like we need a sense of community and sense of belonging, and to work together to be a part of a positive environment.
Yeah. Boy, Cadence Truchot, you have absolutely blown me away with everything that's going on there. I'm thrilled that we got this conversation on the books and we're able to talk about it. So you've put another, like I said, another pin in our map of places to go to visit and see what's happening there. So
Yes,
thank you for everything you're doing. Really appreciate you.
Thank you. Yeah, this was awesome.
Yeah, this is really great. Just hang tight for a second while we sign off here. Howls to you all out there. We'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody.
Looking for more information about Wolf Connection or the podcast? Visit our website at wolfconnection.org, where you can donate, sponsor a wolf, or become a volunteer. Thank you for listening.